Hi there, and welcome back. I'm Terry Burns, and this is another of my videos on wordplay spin-offs in John Dee's Hieroglyphic Monad. In my last video, I talked about stillbone, or the Mercury becoming perfected by stillbone, and that's a wordplay that I don't know of anywhere but in the work of John Dee. However, what I'm going to talk about today is ubiquitous among Christian Kabbalists. Let me share my screen, and we'll just get started here. Today, I'm going to talk about John Dee's wordplay with the word atom and red and earth. Now, if you have studied Kabbalah, which is one of the main contexts of the hieroglyphic monad, you know what I'm going to say already. If you went to Hebrew school as a kid, you learned this in first grade. But there are many people today who study the Western mystery tradition and don't know Hebrew and the Hebrew letters. If you're one of those people, then I just want to bring this to your attention. You could spend the rest of your life studying it, but for now, we're just going to do the basics. So the idea is that in Hebrew, atom is the same word for the red earth, really kind of an ochre colored earth that atom comes from in a literal interpretation of Genesis. Now, that's the same as the opening of the Torah, but because of different qualities of Hebrew, there would be less of a tendency to take it quite so literally. Let me explain why. In English, Adam is a guy's name, especially the first man in Genesis. That's sort of a duh. There are all kinds of things, though, that you can do with the Hebrew letters that you can't do with English letters. So, first of all, here's the word for Adam, Aleph, Dalet, Mem. You read in this direction. You probably know that already. Every letter in Hebrew has a direct numeric equivalent. So Aleph, first letter of the alphabet, 1. It is associated with a particular kind of thing because of its shape. In the case of Aleph, that would be an ox, sometimes a leader. Why is that? Well, listen, I'm just trying to open up a field of study for you. You can Google Aleph, or even on YouTube, watch whole videos on Aleph, or learn about the meditative practice of just thinking about Aleph all day for a day and writing down what you think about. And I'm not going to talk about all of those. I'm just trying to open up a door for you. Speaking of which, here is Dalet, the door. This is supposed to look like kind of the doorway, or you can think of it as a pathway. It's also associated with the number 30. Mem is associated with water. There are two mems, a mem at the end of the word called mem final, which is what this is, and another mem if it's in the word. So this simple root, Aleph, Dalet, Mem, means a person. It's a masculine form, so you might think of it as a man, or you can have that discussion with yourself if we're talking about biological sex here or not. But it also means red earth or red. Red is usually pronounced Edom, but it's spelled the same as Adam. By the way, Adama, what you have down here, Aleph, Dalet, Mem, and that's what the mem that's not a final looks like. And hey is associated with the window. This is the feminine for ground or earth in biblical Hebrew, or the Hebrew of the Talmud. You might find it interesting too to know that here, where you just have Dalet Mem, that's how you would write blood. So from this, you can come up with all kinds of permutations. Now, remember that one of the big informing contexts of the hieroglyphic monad is the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, better translated probably as the book of formation. And that describes the cosmos as created by the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and also from 10 ideal powers that emanate from the Ein Sof. That is going to give us the 32 paths of the tree of life, which we'll see in the next slide. But because of this, the meaning of individual letters is very, very important. Also because of this, in his letter to Maximilian, Dee will later refer to Gematria, Notarikon, and Temura, which are different permutations of meaning you can make with Hebrew letter. Gematria is the one you're most likely to be familiar of. It's an alphanumeric code or cipher where a numerical value is assigned to a word or phrase based on its letters. There's a English Gematria, Latin Gematria, Greek Gematria, but the Hebrew Gematria, and the Greek one also actually, just the letter already means a number. So we saw how, for example, Adam, the Gematria would be 71, right? 30 plus 40 plus 1. It's a Hebrew term, but many people argue that it is derived from the Greek word for geometry. That is something Dee would have known and assumed to be true in his time, given how much he loves geometry in ancient Greek. Okay, Deutericon, not used as often, but it's where you shift, you have the first letter stand for the final letter, and you look for deeper meanings, or you use it to send coded messages. Tamura is one I won't really talk about. You can look it up on your own if you're interested, but it has 3 forms: Atbash, Avgad, and Albam, and it's also a nice way to send coded messages. In our video of context for the hieroglyphic monad, we also talked about the Kircher tree as a context, and I mentioned that it is by far the most commonly used in Christian or Hermetic Kabbalah since the time of John Dee. It's named for Athanasius Kircher. Kircher in his work refers to things that Dee says in the letter to Maximilian in the hieroglyphic monad, like Dee's comments about spoken Kabbalah or real Kabbalah. Dee's only Kabbalistic treatise was lost, so we never know explicitly that this is the arrangement he's using. But since the people who rely on Dee's work use it, and since it reverse engineers just fine, we can think Kircher's tree is very likely based upon the one of Dee's. Also, if you think that the monad symbol is a symbol for a hidden thought behind Rosicrucianism, it's the form that the Rosicrucians use in Victorian magical orders influenced by Dee, particularly the Order of the Golden Dawn. Back to Adam. Adam has explicit references in Hermetic Kabbalah. Adam Kadmon, for instance, is referred to the crown Sephira. Oops, misspelling there, sorry, folks. So also think of Adam and the tree. If you're reading Genesis literally, well, Adam has a bad experience with a tree. So does Eve. I'd say Eve's is a bit worse, but anyway, that's the tree of good and evil. But if you consider that this is the tree being talked about, you have another whole level of interpretation. That same tree appears in Revelation. This is another way that we know we're not talking about Rabbinic Kabbalah, because if you're doing Rabbinic Kabbalah, you don't care about the book of Revelation, but the Hermetic Kabbalists and Christian Kabbalists do. So if you are talking about this tree, you have far more openings for interpretation. By the way, that's the name of Dee's lost Kabbalistic work, completed just 2 years before he wrote the hieroglyphic monad. So we've talked about all the things you can do with Adam generally, or that other people in Dee's time period might do. Let's see what Dee does. And I just am going to give you 3 examples from the hieroglyphic monad. This first one is his first reference to Adam. It's in the letter to Maximilian, and it's the first and last time where you could in any way associate this with the story in Genesis, or the literal story. So Dee is talking about the phoenix and says, "We have plucked with fear and love all of these theoretical plumes over and against our nudity, the introduction of Adam. With these same philosophers, we clothe ourselves to resist the cold of most cruel ignorance and shame of error." That's in the letter of Maximilian. And so the phoenix plumes are supposed to keep you against your nudity, like Adam was nude, except even then you're sensing a metaphor, aren't you? That the nudity is sort of being naked of any philosophy. After that, there is simply no use of Adam that means literally Adam the dude in Genesis. So let's take theorem 13. He's explicating a symbol, part of the monad, because that's what he does in every theorem. And he says, "And by the will of God, he," that is the symbol he's talking about, "is that most celebrated Mercury of the philosophers, the microcosm, and Adam." Okay, if you are in a Kabbalistically based initiatory society, you should know what is being talked about here with microcosm. If not, pause and go back and take a look at your knowledge lectures. You should know this. I'll give you the answer at the bottom of the screen, but let me talk about the next one first. Theorem 22. 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. This is going to be an important theorem. And here is part of a chart that you get there. These are Greek letters. You probably recognize a stylized alpha and omega, the beginning and end. In the Greek New Testament, you have Jesus talk about himself as the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end. Now here he's talking about Adam. Adam exists before the elements. These are not the ones you studied in high school on the periodic table. These are earth, wind, air, fire. I'm sorry, air and wind are the same. Earth, wind, fire, water, ether. Mortal Adam, male and female, he's talking about a kind of inchoate humanity. Born in a stable, it sounds like Jesus, right? Well, in fact, it would be the concept of Jesus as you would project Jesus onto that Kabbalistic tree. So a concept that may not be new to some of you, but maybe the first time some of you have heard that. Also, if you know either from poetry or from scriptural exegesis, there is a habit that begins in the late Middle Ages and continues until today among some Christian groups of looking at the Old Testament as prefiguring the New Testament, where Adam prefigures Jesus. So you could do that with it too. The cross, when we get to the cross, that's going to be his great theorem on conic sections and a pun on crux, the crux of the matter. So what would that have to do with Adam? Well, in this case, the cross is going to be referred to Tifereth. Tifereth is referred to the sun, S-O-N, of God, as well as the sun, S-U-N, and gold. Omega is after the elements, an immortal Adam, the king of kings everywhere, and in terms of alchemy, vivification, making something alive. So this is making something immortal from the dust. That's just theorem 22, and that's not all that's happening in theorem 22. But do you see how if you just think Adam, this dude in Genesis, like how? You have to understand all the transmutations he is doing. These are transformational symbols. Dee will also pun on Adam in many, many other places, implicitly or by embedding it in another word like he does with Voarch Adamus. That's another word we'll have a video on sometime later. I said I'd explain this up here, microcosm. Dee essentially is using microcosm there as a synonym for microprosopis, and that's usually thought to include the Sephiroth of Kesed, Geburah, Tifereth, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod that surround, all of those surround Tifereth except Tifereth itself. Tifereth is usually associated, as I've mentioned before, with the sun, S-O-N, sun, S-U-N, and gold in the Christian Kabbalah of Dee's time. Sometimes later groups refer it to other sacrificed gods like Osiris. Now, that's a good starting place for an exploration of red earth Adam. Let me end my screen sharing here. And I just want to say that some of the things later thinkers have done in looking at the Hebrew alphabet and Gematria, and then the geometry of it is fascinating, and you can explore all of that too. I know there are some of Dan Winter's students here, and you know the thing that Dan does with the flame letter in a tetrahedron, and you shine a light into that flame letter and you can get every letter in the Hebrew alphabet. There are others who do path workings on the tree, but then they associate a path on the tree with a different place on the cube. So you get all kinds of Hermetic Kabbalah mappings of Hebrew letters onto cubes. There are all kinds of things you can explore, but that's it for me today. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.